Hello. Hey guys. Happy New Year.
Hello.
So welcome
Hello.
guys. First stream of 2022. In fact, not just for Big O, but also for I guess for developer space as well. Yeah.
Yep.
So yeah.
Not bad.
Hope you guys.
Hardworking.
Sorry.
Yeah. No, I was saying we are quite hardworking.
Yes.
Pat on the back.
I have this guy to pat my back. I'm gonna orientate it correctly. He's patting my back now. So yeah, today we have a very exciting sharing. So we have a professor from NUS today who's going to be speaking with us. In fact, more of discussion, in terms of how technology has affected tech and what we are looking at, in the next few years in the future. So before we look into the event for today, of course, to first introduce, some things about self. So maybe I'll hand over to Jiaxing first on
Yep.
introducing developer space.
Yep. Thanks, Ryan. So, for those of you who are tuning in for the first few times, a quick intro on what Google Developer Space is about. So, we are a platform to connect developers and startups from around the region to learn and connect with one another. So, yeah, really excited to be having our first session of the year, kicking it off with Big O and together with Uncle Soo, who will be coming on stage later on. Yep.
Yep. So make sure you follow the different social media channels of Big O. You can see over here with our website, Facebook channel, community page on GDG as well as on YouTube. So this is usually where we put our events. Let's say for this event we'll post it in advance in our YouTube as well as for our Facebook page. So make sure you follow those to get the latest update on our different events that we are looking at organizing. In fact, in the next few months and weeks, we probably have some interesting ones. The next one is going to be about burnout. So that's also something going to be very interesting to be talking about, discuss about. In fact. So make sure you like, share, subscribe this feed if you're on YouTube. Subscribe to our channel. Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you.
Yep. Similarly for developer space, yeah, we have a website and we're also on Twitter, Facebook, and YouTube. So if you want to know what events we are hosting with developers and startup communities, do subscribe to keep updated with the latest news.
All right. This is also an opportunity for us to give glory to our new bread and butter provider. So right now, as you can see from Wayne's background as well, and also from this slide, we are now being sponsored by Zlearn for this space that we can host this event. So Zlearn is it's one of the subsidiaries under Kidon Learning Group, and what they do is they actually have a service both available on the web and the app to go and learn various skills actually. So you can learn from people like the VP of Product Innovation at Netflix. You can learn from people like Simon Sinek. You can learn from Elon Musk, Richard Branson, and all forms of courses. And one thing that's extremely interesting with this product is that you can actually use your Skills Futures credits for a yearly subscription. So if you have any Skills Futures credits lying around, you can actually use it for free. And hopefully you can upskill yourself, in this time of pandemic. This is a good opportunity for you to relax and learn a bit more life skills here and there.
All right. So upcoming topics. So as I mentioned just now, burnout. That's actually a very interesting topic that we have been thinking about tackling for some time. And we have a exciting guest who will be speaking with us or discussing with us, on this topic. So watch out for this. We'll post more updates on this event in next month. In fact, we might be doing it in a slightly different format then. But yeah, without further ado, let's bring out our guest today. Let me bring him up. Hey, Uncle Soo.
Hi, everyone. It's my honor to be the first guest of 2022. I just realized it's actually the first guest of 2022. I'm very happy to be here. And at least after tonight, I can brag to my kids that I'm now a YouTuber. So that's my main reason to be here in a sense. right?
So,
So I'm excited
can,
to actually start the discussion, right?
mm, can you give a short introduction for yourself? And what do you do at NUS?
So I'm actually a lecturer, now an associate professor at the School of Computing. So I've been teaching a number of computer science subjects for the last 15 to 20 years. Depending on how you count. Other than that, my interest is also building technology to enhance teaching, right, in my spare time. Yeah.
Mm. Okay, so I'm gonna jump back to my slides over here. So, all right, I uh, so we have a few questions, but I think wanted to bring out this slide first to actually bring in some context towards the certain trends. In fact, this is something I managed to get from the NUS. This is like the yearly intake
Yep.
into NUS.
Mhm.
Specifically, you can see over here there's three areas: computer science, computer engineering, and BA. BA actually started around 2013. I think this was when I was also in NUS. So you can see actually there's no stats over here because it started only at that year.
Mm.
But it's a really interesting trend. You can see over here. I was looking at it and I realized that most of these years is usually around the same numbers. Computer science usually is more, but at 2017, something changed and there seems to be like an increase since then. And I thought, this would be a very interesting, I guess, chart in a way to sort of kick off our discussion over here and maybe to throw in uh, the first question over here. Oh, yeah. So there seems to be a lot more interest in this few years in regards towards tech. And like what do you guys think about this trend? Towards now there's a lot more people moving towards going towards these disciplines in the universities.
Mhm.
Okay, so I'm gonna
Uh,
take away this. Yeah, so can see Julius.
Actually, the first thing is that when you bring up the chart, it almost made me
Uh,
cry again. This is actually the pain, right, that all computer science teachers is going through right at the moment. The increase can only be described as explosive, right? So in maybe just the last 2 to 3 years, every year we are actually seeing a 30 to 40% of increase. In a way, this is depending on how you look at it, right? You can call it a good luck of basically a combination of several reasons, right, going at the same time. I believe it's in these few years that we start to see huge success story, right, in IT startup and so on, right, in the newspaper and so on. And we have more tech giant coming to Singapore to set up headquarters and so on. We have actually news that covering, right, all these new unicorn, right, in the tech industry and so on. And to be honest, sometimes I hate to put it in this way, but sometimes Singaporean parent could be a bit more quite practical. They will actually look at what is actually the graduate pay as one of the consideration factor. And to put it mildly, right, unfortunately, our graduates are doing very, very well in the industry. Right, so combining all these factors together, we see this huge boom, right, in the interest of computing. And actually, the picture you showed just now doesn't really tell the whole story. That's the scary part, right? This is student going into computer science as their major, right? But as you know or may have heard, NUS has sort of opened up the curriculum structure that student can actually sort of easily do a double major or minor and so on. So we actually have quite a huge number of students doing double major from other faculties, doing a minor, right, from other faculties and so on. So the actual number that we are handling every year, right, every cohort is actually much larger than what you actually see in the charts just now. Yeah.
So what was the implications of having more students doing double majors, like taking this as part of their discipline throughout their education in uni? Is this something that they, I mean, going by the trends in the school, probably you'll know better. Do they stick to, let's say, this, like in the case of computer science, that discipline as part of what they will be employed as, when they go out in the working society?
So in a way, I feel that double major in certain combinations sometimes doesn't quite make sense. When you hear someone do A and B plus together, you will just go, huh? How do they work together? But at the current stage, you find that computing is an easy discipline to go with many others. Right. So, for example, if you say law and computing, it actually makes sense, right? Because they are actually now quite a lot of advanced in the AI technology, for example, right, that actually automate certain part of the law procedure. Like I believe a while back, there's actually a study that actually showed that the AI can do almost as well as some of the lawyer in actually looking for past cases and so on, which computer excel at. So because of that, then the double major in a way is really up to the imagination of the student, right? So some of them are very obvious, right? So computing plus a science, right, which also makes sense, right? You can use AI approaches, right, in some of the science research. You can actually do AI with accountancy, right, and so on and so forth, right? So at this point in time, that's also partly why it's so popular, right, as a double major ingredient, right, that a student would choose, right? So at this point in time, I'm not sure many of those double majors students have graduated or not, right? It's sort of a pretty new change, right, at US. So we don't yet know whether they go out and really leverage, right, on this two discipline training, or in the end, it actually go into one certain direction, right? So at this point, I think it's a bit early to tell, right? But we hope actually to see that they actually utilize the strength of the two fields. Yeah.
So maybe I'll bring up the graph again, because I just okay, I'll take away the question as well. So yeah, the one of the things I'm really curious to ask about, again, this is open to the floor. I think Julius being in the working industry, Jiaxing, you also have been in different companies for some time now. Like, I wanted to ask, like, what do y'all think in terms of the uptick, since 2017? So I'm just gonna highlight somewhere over here. You can see over here 2017, and suddenly things changed. Was wondering if you guys have any insights towards like what could have propelled this huge change. Like technology wasn't something that was suddenly new and then like everyone started wanting to move over that discipline. It has been there for, I think, like since what, like startups has been there, thriving around there for maybe like early 2010s and all that. But this seems to be a very interesting, like instead of a gradual growth, suddenly a huge increase. In fact, almost twice, right? In just 2-3 years. Like I think maybe mirroring what you mentioned just now, like 40% every new cohort. I do have it. Okay, I don't want to try and joke, but like I do have maybe a bit of a theory. But again, like please share if you have any other thoughts. I remember this was around the time when I was close to graduating, or maybe graduated for a few years, and this was the period where I believe salary really blew up as well. I think somewhere in the year of 2017. In my mind, I remember it was Grab. I tried to find the article, but I couldn't really find it now. But this was when they were offering very high salaries for fresh graduates. So that was something that was a huge culture shock to me and my friends back then, because that was kind of like, whoa, is this possible for a fresh grad? And it seems like things did follow that trend after that. Like, again, the same story about salary, now pushing towards people getting more into this discipline. But I'm interested to see if there's like any other reasons you guys feel might be pushing this trend towards this direction.
Maybe I can share a bit of insights as well, but it's probably more framed as a question, which I think Jasin and Uncle Soo might actually be able to add more. So I am actually thinking from the perspective whereby, the increase in the number of students enrolling in this, in especially in computer science, right, seems to be largely fueled by money. As with almost anything in history, right? Like you go to education so that you can actually earn money. That's whether you like to say it, out loud or not. That seems to be to some degree, right? Why people go to education to take a university degree is primarily because they want to actually earn money, right? I have seen a statistic few weeks ago actually, whereby there was a computation that was done, and what they found out is that university graduates, right, tend to actually earn uh, about 98%, like the 98% more likely to earn more money than a non-university graduate. And also throughout their lifetime, right, the net difference of the amount of money a university graduate earns is somewhere around 500,000 in comparison. So you have $500,000 more towards the end of your life if you're a university graduate in general on the average. So it seems to actually be fueled by this kind of phenomenon. I think also the good thing about Singapore having more and more people going to computer science, and this is my very isolated view, right, is that technology seems to be an evergreen, how shall I say, part of the economy. There's always things that can be improved using technology. And I think that the last decade or two, right, there has been doomsayers already that technology is going to slow down because we are peaking and stuff like that. But what we have found over the last 20 years is that things seems to continue to accelerate. It's hard to say whether the next couple of decades will have the same result. Of course, as now what we are seeing is that from consumer, how should I say, from using technology to benefit the consumer, right, in terms of entertainment, in terms of access to information and so forth, it's now slowly disrupting all sorts of fields, right, health technology, education technology, financial technology, so on and so forth. So it might actually slow down, but it will always be there to improve lives. So in a way, it kind of puts Singapore in a good position. But also the other worry is that as we try to um, have more and more, how shall I say, students who have computer science specialization, right? It is unclear how this will affect Singapore's economy. First of all, like if you are hiring computer science graduates, right? In terms of how shall I say, purchasing power, if I can put it that way. Silicon Valley companies actually are better funded than Singapore companies, for example. So the entrepreneurs in Singapore will continue to be challenged by, talent crunch, because people tend to want more money. Yeah. So it uh, remains a question whether entrepreneurship can thrive in Singapore because of this phenomenon. So from this angle, I'm actually interested to hear what Uncle Sue or Justin have might have to say.
I maybe I can go first because afterwards I have a question for Uncle Sue. Yeah, but anyway, I think Koo made a comment. 2017. So he said, 2017 was the year we pushed a lot more training in the tech sector through Skills Future program. Yeah, I think 2017 was also the year where we saw one of the highest startup funding in Southeast Asia. So I think on that note, I think Wei Yuan, you mentioned about startup and the talent crunch earlier. So I think maybe that period of time, there was a lot of talk about startups raising money and hiring developers, and that could be why people are more likely to want to pursue computer science. And then this leads to the next question for Uncle Sue. So I know this chart talks about enrollment, but for the admissions, was it a conscious decision to accept a lot more students in 2017 onwards? Like, did the number of application for computer science maybe double or triple, and that's why the school felt that you had to open up more slots, or was it actually about the same compared to previous years? But it's just that you felt the department felt that you have to invest more resources into this.
Okay, so this question actually has, again, multiple parts of answer. One part of it actually sort of linked back to the previous question. I think one thing that we sort of already hinted at is, I believe around the same time, Singapore government is actually pushing quite hard into the tech sector. If you recall, there's actually a Smart Nation initiative, and then you actually have the cybersecurity, right? And then there was actually a huge number saying that, there are 30,000 jobs, I believe, right? The number is actually quite huge, right, in the cybersecurity sector and so on. And one thing that may not be very obvious to maybe people from other countries is that in Singapore, every department actually have a quota, in a sense, that's suggested by MOE. right? So they basically look at the forecast of the industry, and then they will try to say, okay, we think this industry actually need more people, and then they will actually encourage the department to take in more. So in a sense, it's not a unilateral decision that we feel that, okay, we just double our intake, but rather it's actually a combination of factors, right? So because of the booming in the market, there are a lot more application coming in, and at the same time, we actually also are encouraged, right, to actually take in more students at the same time. So that's why you see a double effect, right? So now our cutoff is much higher than before. We are now the top 3 in NUS. We are actually on par with law and medicine, right? In terms of cutoff, which is unheard of before. And even so, the number that we are looking at is actually at this level, which is quite scary, right? So what you are seeing are actually the top students, right? The best student in the particular cohort, right, going into computer science, right? So yeah.
Okay, I have one question. Hopefully, try and make it sound appropriate. So, I think the sentiment that you mentioned, like right now, the cutoff score for entering the course is such a high mark, right? How does the school ensure, or how can educational institutions ensure they bring in the right talent, so to speak? Like in the sense that, of course, you get a lot of people who can do well on paper, like being able to get like good A-level results, doing well, okay, in poly as well. But how would that translate into, is it doing well in that particular field?
Okay, that's a good question. I think that this seems like a trend. I always answer a question with multiple parts. Right. So the first part is we actually noticed this right from the get-go. I think all share the feeling that sometime in this particular field, right, probably the same for most fields, that the passion and the aptitude, right, for the particular field is quite important. And academic result may not directly correlate to the aptitude, right, in the sense, right? So that's the first thing. So what we have tried to do in the recent year is that we still reserve a certain quota, right, for discretionary intake, right? Meaning that we don't just take all students based on A-level result or the A-level result equivalent, but rather we actually look at other factors, right? So for example, the student did well in the computing competition before, they already have a startup, right, or something like that, right? Just example. That's actually how we ensure we have a good mix, right, of students with passion. Then the other part to this answer is that, interestingly, we have a colleague who actually runs some non-official study. By the way, this is non-official. Please don't say this is like research show that they did this. Right? So he did an unofficial study of among the students, and then it seems that the student who did well in A level eventually do very well in computing and go out to be like some of the top developer as well. Right? So it's not true to say that then a good result doesn't translate to a good interest in computing. Right? So that's just the multiple aspect of this answer. Right? So we try to ensure by reserving some quota, but at the same time, because the student does have a good foundation, and most of them are very motivated, right? They are very driven, right? And it seems to actually turn out to have a good result in the end as well. Yeah.
Okay, just to bring up a question by someone in our audience, I think Ku is asking about the forecast. So I think this is for Jia Xing's question to Uncle Soo previously, right? I think forecast from MOE, right? That's what is mentioned on the intake.
Yep. So that it is like a crystal ball to me, right? So we don't really know how they actually come up with this number. We always puzzle about that, right? Because when you're actually faced with a 30-40% increase, although we are happy that our discipline is now in the spotlight, we also have the same doubt as most of you here. Do we actually have that kind of demand? But of course, Singapore government, right, as far as we know, they actually, based on some data they actually have, right? So looking at multiple factors, they do see that this may be a factor, a sector they actually want to grow. Right? That could be a main reason. Or they do see a huge demand, right, of the sector. So far, it does seem that it pans out, as in our graduate actually step up, right? Meaning that there's actually a real demand in the market, right? So, yeah.
Okay, so moving on to another question. So I think it's very interesting now that there's like just now you mentioned about things like the Smart Nation initiative. There is definitely that interest and that institutional effort to push towards more people in this industry, in this institute. How has the challenges changed though? Like I would imagine that for myself as a student going in from in the early 2010s, I can see there's a lot of maybe some small differences here and there compared, okay, to say a lot, but small differences here and there when I look at the juniors coming out from the same batch. Now they're touching a lot more different fields. Like when I first came out, there wasn't even things like AR, VR. Like those weren't very popular fields. Yeah,
Yep.
ML, AI. Now we are onto blockchain. So things have changed a lot. Has it changed a lot in terms of the challenges and the syllabus in the school, towards the demands of the students, like essentially?
So in a sense, this question, if you look from the teaching side, it's actually quite interesting, right? Because imagine you're teaching a class of 200 before, now you're teaching a class of 400 sometimes, right? And some of our class are 600, 700, right? So that's actually a teaching problem. But from the student side, I'm not sure they have vastly different challenge than before. They have the usual issue of they are struggling to find ways to actually highlight themselves, right? Because now you have such a large cohort. How do you distinguish yourself, right? How do you make yourself stand out? Right? That is actually still a pretty challenging problem for the students. So we actually see students that with meticulous plan on what kind of internship they want to go for, then after that, you follow by the other internship and so on. They actually plan all this in advance to make sure they actually can hit the target of getting into top tech company at the end, right? So I guess now the challenge is for the student is actually really trying to build a strong enough portfolio, right, in the 3 or 4 years, right, they have in the school. So that's the main one that I see, right? On the other end, that we also see students that get into this discipline for the wrong reason, which is actually common even before this, right? So we have students that join this because they have a misunderstanding of the field, or maybe they're encouraged by friends, or family, or parents, and things like that. We also see the student going into this and feel disinterest, right? Like okay, this is actually not my field. I can do it, but then I will never feel the thrill, right, of doing development. Right, so we do see that as well. Like since our base number is larger, then of course by proportion we have slightly more student of facing the same problem as well. Yeah. So I would say from a student side, it's not vastly different, right? Just that now there are a lot more of them, right? Then of course this COVID doesn't help, right? Because we have a cohort who have never seen their friends, right? Since the start of the pandemic, right? So that's different, and then probably faced by all disciplines, right? Not just computing. Yeah.
I like how you mentioned that one of the challenges in terms of differentiating yourself. So I have a quick fun question, I guess, but also maybe a two-part question. Okay, I'll put it that way. So internships. So you mentioned about internships, and for me as a student, the expectation was one internship over 4 years. Now I hear very different stories. Today is the average internship 2 for each student. And what's the fun question? What's the highest amount of internships you have seen a student did in school?
Okay, so they do have limited time, right? So they cannot have a very huge number. But I do hear students actually go on internship without claiming the credit. Right, that actually happens, right? So right now, I think it actually changed after your cohort, right? Back then, your internship is not compulsory, right? Was it compulsory? Already compulsory?
I think the system was very different back then. It was compulsory.
So now it's actually compulsory, right? So so students have to do a 6-month internship, or they actually do 3 months, 2 or 3 months internship, right? So that's why 2 is the usual number if they go for the shorter one, right, or one large one. But what I see is that there are students that actually do a couple of other internship on their free time, some of them actually take a LOA, right? At times to actually, LOA means leave of absence. They are absent from school for one semester, just because they clinch a very prestigious internship. They want to just continue working, right? So it does happen, right? But I think that's quite rare, right? Yeah.
Yeah, I maybe just to also explain a little bit. Okay, that during my time, I think the system was a lot different. I think back then, while internship was encouraged, it wasn't something that was like to the degree of being encouraged today. I can see when I'm talking to my interns, there is a very huge shift in the like the concerns in terms of students need to take the internship to learn about what's being done outside in the industry rather than just learning in school. And I like that a lot. I think it's good that the school has also sort of adapted to that by making the systems better, easier for people to get internships. Of course, I also say like, yeah, nowadays it's also kind of like a lot more like companies do want to also attract a lot of talent in, be it like full-time employee or even interns to continue towards that. So I think now is really, if you're a student watching this, it's really a very favorable landscape today, in terms of getting internships out there to again to differentiate yourself lah in a way.
Yeah, and actually some company, I believe they are using internship as a probation, right? So because now hiring cost is high, right? You want to make sure you get the right person, right? And even though tech company do crazy rounds of interviews, but I don't think that can compare with a 6-month internship that you actually can see how this person work, right? For real. Right, so some company does actually take the internship as some kind of probation, right? And that's why students are really competing. I try to get into some of these internship, right? So yeah, multiple factors. Yeah.
Uncle Soo, thanks for sharing your thoughts, and I was actually interested to know as well. So we have seen a huge concentration of computer science students, as you mentioned, kind of taking internships here and there, kind of developing their skills in those areas. And of course, because they also have limited time, right? 4 to 5 years in school on the average, right? Do you see also that with the amount of investments that they're doing in computer science courses, are there any things that are sacrificed along the way, such as, let's say, for example, sophistication in things like in the arts, for example, in the humanities, and do you think it's something that we have to be concerned about?
That's again a great question, which is at this moment is a big question that the NUS is trying to answer. Not just computing. So if you actually look at the current development, right, in NUS, is that they are now trying to train the student in multiple disciplines, right, rather than back then that when you go into science, let's say you go into biology, you're silo and go into just this discipline. But rather now we actually merge, right, the science and the faculty of arts and social science into one college. So students in the first year are taking a broad-based training. This is actually happening across the university, right? Not just these two faculty. So we in recent year we are actually reducing our core, right? Core means modules that you have to take, right? So we are reducing the core and opening up, right, the degree, so that like I mentioned before, now it's actually easier for you to do double major. Right? Back then you have to plan meticulously and then you probably can't finish in 5 years. But now you actually can do a double major in probably 4 years, right? Or do a minor quite easily, right? So that is actually the shift, right, in the entire design, right, of the curriculum at NUS, and I believe it's actually also starting, right, to start, right, in other universities. Yeah.
Thank you so much, Uncle Soo.
No
And do you
problem.
mind if I ask a follow-up question as well, right?
Yeah,
So
sure.
what we have seen in other countries, for example, such as Taiwan and also in India, whereby a lot of students, right, actually race towards the master's degree. So until they get a master's degree, they don't actually go to the to the workforce. And the core idea, it seems, is that like actually only until you get a master's degree then you're recognized. Do you see the same thing happening in Singapore?
Interestingly, we actually see the opposite. Opposite meaning that we are having a hard time to persuade Singaporean students to do a master or PhD. Right, we're actually struggling very, very hard. And like I mentioned before, this is a good and bad characteristic of a Singaporean that Singaporeans are usually very practical, right? So they will actually sit there and then do a calculation, right? Very easy, right? 5 years of doing a PhD, which is the average time, versus 5 years in the industry. And given that the industry is paying so well now, you can never win this calculation, right? In a sense. So we actually have a pretty hard time, right, to actually encourage students to go into research, right, for further study at the moment, right? So we usually have more postgrad application, right, from other country rather than local. So at the moment, I don't see this trend happening yet, right? Because I think one thing maybe is actually the industry, the demand is still high, right? So I guess if you see that the demand taper out, then because you want to stand out, you want to distinguish yourself, then you say, oh, I have a master, right? Sounds better than just a bachelor. And I think that's where you go down that particular slope, which is at the moment not happening, I believe.
I think we have someone in the audience who also agree with it. Yeah, the high opportunity cost in a PhD.
Yeah, that's exactly the reason. Yeah.
Does this signify a different trend though? Like, so okay, I was speaking to one of my interns before, and it does what this intern told me was that I think in NUS there was also some program that actually push students, like this is for undergrad, push them towards other ways of differentiating themselves, like besides going for masters or PhD, instead going for things like getting a cloud certificate from Google Cloud, AWS. Like, is this part of the direction that the school also looks at, getting students to differentiate themselves, pushing them in that direction, I guess?
So in the at the moment, I don't think we have a very, how do they say, structured way of helping the student to differentiate themselves, but rather we are, in a sense, giving them the opportunity or exposure to let them know that this is what happening outside, right? So don't have the very traditional understanding. I score all A's in my modules, then I'm good enough, right? So we emphasize this repeatedly throughout their degree program, but we don't have a lot of structured way, right? Like I say, to actually help them to differentiate themselves. For example, you mentioned certification and so on. So as far as I know, I don't think we ever encourage that, at least in CS. Right? Meaning that there's no module saying that, you take this module, then you get a certification. That's never the way that we structure a module, right, in a sense. But rather we will have modules that actually let them see what's actually happening outside. We invite industry speaker to come back in. Then they understand what is needed, right, for them to distinguish themselves. And I believe the senior effect is also very important, right? They see how the senior manage to actually differentiate themselves, and they are actually imitating them, right? So I think that's actually more a stronger influence, right, on the current generation. Yep.
Do you have a question from the audience? So I'm going to bring it up. So I think this one is a bit of an inversion of all these questions we've asked earlier on. So far we've been asking more about what technology has, or rather what the change in this industry has done to education. But I think this one is a bit of an inversion, which is how has technology helped education? And this is an interesting question, I guess, because we have done a project on that, and I guess there's also other things you have done.
So this is a large topic, right? So if you actually want to talk about this, we probably can spend an hour on this. As a very simple way to look at things, I think technology, you can sort of see them in several common usage, right? One is essentially it helps you to scale up, right? Meaning that these are things that you can do before, just that having technology help you to actually scale it up, right? You can actually handle more students, right? And so on and so forth. One example would be, you can imagine auto marking, right? Auto grading. Before that, you can grade the script yourself, but then now using auto grading, you can probably grade 200-300 students, right? So that's actually the first one, right? You do scale up. The second one is actually enhancing your teaching, right? Meaning that there are certain things that you can't really do before, but then now you can add into your teaching. A very simplistic example would be videos, right? Before that, it's probably hard, right, to actually have video clips right into your lecture slides or whatever. It's probably hard to actually have interaction right inside your lecture and so on. But now we're actually able to do it, right? That's actually the plug for Williams and I, my project, I guess, right? We actually have a large-scale classroom response system that you can actually interact with several hundreds of students, right, at the same time. But I think the last category that's the most interesting, and as far as I know, we have not seen an actual example yet, would be to really reinventing, right, the education, which is actually part of the question, right? So we have not seen how technology totally changed education, meaning that there was something that can was not even dreamed of before, and now it's actually being done, right? So at this point in time, we don't have that, but more of the previous two category, right? Either we scale up or enhance, but we don't have something totally new yet, right? So that's the point. Yeah.
Uncle Sue, as a follow-up question, right? Something that I think our audiences and I think a lot of people have been thinking about, right, is the accessibility of quality education. We have seen, for example, that over the past couple of decades, right, the cost to for us to get a good quality education is actually going much higher than inflation, right? So that said, also with COVID, right, we have also seen that over the past 2 years there has been a certain amount of shift towards online learning and so forth. So that having said, do you see that with this ongoing trend, do you see that online learning can help actually mitigate some of the rising costs in education?
Oh, yeah. Actually, that's what I originally thought, because I thought now you actually have more ways to access high quality education, right? So several very famous example would be you actually can access some of the courses from famous university, right? Harvard, MIT, they have their open courseware. You can go on to Coursera. Some of them are not free, of course, but then it's more accessible, right, than before, where they are actually in the classroom somewhere, right, that you have to cross the ocean to reach, but now you actually can access them, right? So now I think the question become, how do we know, right, when a certain person claim that they have finished this course, they actually have the skill set and knowledge, right, that is actually being taught, right? So in the sense, the university, one of its role, not the only role, is to certify that this student at least went through a rigorous assessment. We are relatively sure, right, that he or she has the required, right, skill set or knowledge, right? So this is actually the part that is still missing and not easily solved, because online teaching, maybe this is a question that we can discuss later on. Online teaching only good for certain aspect of teaching, right? It cannot really entirely replace, right, the current way of teaching. And you can only assess, right, the student ability in some way, but not the entire spectrum, right? So I think that's what is currently missing. Yeah.
I see. Thank you so much, Uncle Sue.
Yeah,
And
no
if you don't
problem.
mind, follow up, I guess follow up to the follow
Yeah,
up.
sure.
So when you mentioned that the
Mm.
verification, right, of the students, how should I say, qualifications,
Mm.
after completing the course and so forth, do you see that internship could be a good testament that they're actually competent enough to, perform in the industry?
So now the question become, when you go for internship, the one that is most qualified to sort of verify that you have the skill set is the company. Now you have to then think about whether the company is willing to certify the student. Right. So we have to understand that we are actually very grateful that the various companies taking our student for internship, but asking them to actually evaluate the student in depth and then certify that they actually have the skill set is probably too much of an ask. Right. So that is the problem, right? So, but if the company are willing to do it, right, then I think internship will be a valuable verification of the student skill. Yeah. And that's probably why internship is now so competitive right nowadays. Yeah.
Actually, I also like to maybe butt in a little bit to answer the earlier question, in terms of online learning, and has it somewhat helped to reinvent maybe the education industry a little bit, reinvent in the sense of whether it's considered essential in hiring, getting staff hired, let's say even in a what's that, technology industry. And to me, right, I mean, I do have a anecdote, or rather like evidence in real life, where I actually hired, like when I was back then in 2 companies ago, I hired someone without any qualifications in that field. Funnily enough, I hope this person is watching this or watching it sometime later. I'll probably send this to him or her later. But essentially, this person got a master's in architecture. Mind you, architecture in building buildings, not building software architecture. So, and this person went through, like, I think one of the examples mentioned by Uncle Soo just now, Coursera, did a lot of this different exercises, went on to do projects at his or her own time to gain experience in those areas, and finally being able to get a short stint or a few freelance projects and going into this full-time job with us. Yeah, so I think those, it seems like for me, maybe I'll translate this into a question and maybe also towards the floor, I guess mostly towards Julius and Jiaxing, which is like, for companies, do you all see, like, let's say if you are hiring for your companies, do you all see the trend shifting in this area as well? Because I do have a slight worry that as an Asian companies, right? Mostly Asian companies wouldn't do that. Maybe Western companies would. Asian companies would want to, have that hard, like pen and paper. You must have the paper qualification, or else, we don't really recognize it. Rather than maybe, how about you try out our interview exercise? How about you talk to us and see, maybe you do have the skills. It's just that not having that rigorous education behind.
I suppose I should comment first, right? Because comparing our hair color, mine is the whiter one.
Yeah, you have seniority based on hair color.
I think I guess based on my experience also, and I could be totally off, right? Based on my experience, we actually have hired people with very little known qualifications. For example, we had one who didn't even actually graduated from school. Actually, not one, a couple of them actually. But they also ended up becoming some of our best software engineers. And what we found is that during the interview process, right, whenever we test for general cognitive ability, their ability to approach various forms of problems and actually come up with a solution. It may not necessarily be algorithm questions, data structure questions, just a typical, hey, there's something wrong in production. How do we actually find out the root cause? Those kind of questions. Or it could be things like, okay, here's a very vague instruction on how to do things, right? And then we try to see what kind of questions they ask and whether the questions that they're asking actually leads to the answer. What we found that, of course, with a lot of respect to people who think differently, right? Because you surely will have a huge spectrum of people, and they have different ways of solving problems. We found that people who actually ask the right questions can actually arrive at the result that you want. So in a sense, even if they don't have the necessary bright shining qualifications, we as long as they're able to address, right, the questions that we ask in the interview enough, we tend to see a high degree of success. On the other hand, however, we also have to take into account, I guess, the amount of resources companies invest, because if you think about it, having a good resume, having a good profile, right, it actually helps create signals that will increase the chances of you arriving at a good, candidate to actually be employed. So I think it's something also that's difficult to discount because as a company, you want to optimize your resource. And this is something that is not easy, I think, for companies to identify.
Julius, you went so in depth. I don't know what else to add on. But yeah, I think yeah, I do agree. I think sometimes like certifications and qualifications may not be the most important. But also definitely there's a clause. Like I mean, for instance, if Google Cloud team is hiring, they are having a GCP certification definitely is going to be a huge plus. So I think it really depends on the job But if it's not as technical, I don't think like qualifications or certifications are going to be the most important. Even to add on, I think interview process may also not be the best way to evaluate someone, because I think for interviews, we people always put up the best appearance, right? We do know the right things to say. We know what the interviewer is sort of looking for, but yeah, when you start work, so I guess it ties into what Uncle Soo said earlier. People having an internship there for 6 months is definitely going to be more valuable compared to just an interview process. Yeah, so that's from my point of view.
Can I just quickly follow up that I think my Google application back in 2015 hasn't been followed up yet. Like, Justin, if you could nudge the recruiter.
You're
Oh, I'm employed,
overqualified.
sorry.
Overqualified. Yeah, too senior.
Yeah.
So I think I would like to follow up all three of you. You actually mentioned something which is actually an age-old question, like what is the value of the certification? Right. One very cynical view is that, in a sense, the company is trying just to optimize their resource, like what Julius mentioned. Right. It's actually just to cut costs. Right. So if you can look at a CV, you know, at least this person has a chance, then I don't need to spend 1 month, right, to interview this person. And more importantly, right, after I take this person on board, I don't need to spend another 3 months to train him or her, right? So that is actually the very cynical point of view, right? But the other one that what Wei and the example from Wei and earlier is that actually the real value of education, right, is actually to train you to be able to learn properly, right? Meaning that a long time ago, right, being an engineer, trained as an engineer, means that I can throw you into any industry and you actually can pick up the skill, right, and excel, right? So that's the real kind of training that education actually should achieve, rather than saying, oh, this guy know ABC, but rather we know that even if this person doesn't know ABC, we have trained him or her well enough that they actually can pick up, right? Just that whether you are willing to spend the time to let the person to pick up, right, the job, right? So it's actually not a surprise to me that someone with a master in architecture, which is actually one of the hardest discipline to go into in NUS, for example, and can do well, right, in computing, right, if he or she actually have the interest and actually did, right, relevant courses, right? So that is actually not a surprise to me. Yeah.
If I can just address part of what you mentioned earlier on, in regards to the value of certification, maybe just more for me, but also to the rest, if you all want to add in, the value of like for me lah, what I feel about the value of certain certification. Okay, or rather, maybe I should go from another point of view, which is the value of the certification is very important, and you should look at what the value is before you put it in. So I'm not bashing any companies. I'm going to say some companies' name. I'm not bashing anyone. Please do not come and dox me and tell me a lot of stuff. Like, if you're looking for certification that they're very easy to get, for example, if you go to the easier Coursera courses, easier Udemy courses, like those are kind of like courses, there are certifications that are kind of like dime a dozen. Everybody can get it very easily. Barriers to entry is low. So the value is really low. And because some of these courses are also not very well, I don't want to say well marketed, but rather they are not marketed to be things that you like. You can put in a resume, but they don't really put it out there, so people don't really recognize it as key skills. But then in the industry, you do have those common certifications like CKAD, for example, for Kubernetes. You have the GCP certification. You have certification for other cloud providers as well. These different certifications are a lot more rigorous. It's harder to get in. Like, you're supposed to go into this exam hall. Yes, it's all MCQ questions, but you're supposed to sit there for like 2-3 hours to do all of them. It's not like 10 MCQs, like 50 MCQs. And even then, I've done it. It's not easy. So the barriers to entry are higher. People recognize that it's not that easy to get it. Once you get it, it's really a certification that, you know, you have hit that certain standard now. Yeah. So maybe just to answer like why I think from an industry, why certain certifications might make sense in cutting out, like, let's say, the noise, like who with what certification might actually work out more for a certain role, let's say using Google Cloud. Maybe I'll pass on to Julius if, I think he has a question.
Yeah, I'm actually curious to kind of pivoting a little bit, right? Because earlier Uncle Soo actually did mention something along the lines of teaching people how to learn, right? So I think if I can put it in a positive light, right? And this is not a marketing blurb, by the way. Like I actually do believe, and I think Wei Yan, Chasin, and Uncle Soo actually would agree also, since Uncle Soo has been in the teaching profession for decades and decades, right? Like being a teacher, a professor, right? It's something that it's quite noble actually, because like you're actually laying the seeds, planting the seeds for people to be successful. And many of the things that the students actually learn from you, right, and many other professors out there are things that they would actually use in the next 50, 60, 80, 90 years of their lives. So that said, right, I am actually curious to know from your perspective, how do you teach people how to learn, and how do you teach people to how to have the mindset for them to be successful in life?
What I actually find interesting is that, at least in the Singapore context, the student unfortunately are grade fixation. They have a fixation on grade, right? Unfortunately, right? That is a bad thing, but also a good thing, meaning that you actually have an easy handle to push them to the right direction, right? So what I mean is that you actually can use the assessment, right, in a creative way to show them that I'm not looking for memorization. I'm not asking you just to regurgitate your entire lecture slide for me. My test could be open internet, could be open book, but you cannot find the answer, right? And since your grade is linked to that, then you're forced to learn. Oh, this is what, right, the teacher is actually trying to push me to, right? So I learned the principle, but then I have to put it in a very different context, or they are separate topics or ideas together that you have to find a ways to move them, right? Synthesize them, right, into one, right? So that is actually how I usually teach my courses, right? By pushing students to actually do some very odd things in the test and exam. So it's quite common that after test or exam, you will see a lot of cry in the Facebook back then, right? So they will just scream like "Uncle Soo, why?" that kind of thing. I actually even have comments at the student feedback that I like your teaching, but then your test question sounds like feels like IQ question. Please set easier question next time. But I believe they actually meant it as a joke, right? Meaning that it's now known that the course is mostly not painful, but then the test and exam, they are actually faced with interesting challenge. And I think that's how the teacher actually can push the student, right? By really showing them this is what I value, right? Rather than you say, okay, I value higher thinking or the skill and so on. But then in your test, you always say, okay, what's the definition of this? Right? What is 3+4, and so on, right? Then you don't really actually value, right, the kind of skill that you want them to have, right? So that at least that's my take on it, yeah.
Uncle Soo, just a follow-up question on that, right? It seems that you raised something quite interesting, which is to actually help the students, right, to enjoy failure. Because as you can, I guess, as what we have observed, right, in Asia, we are quite fascinated with numbers because we are good mathematicians, and also grades are important. Otherwise, you bring shame to family, and then the next day you
Yeah, I guess
you have
that's
more red skins.
That's the extent.
But I'm curious to know from that angle, right? Because from the Western perspective, failure is celebrated in to some degree, right? So have you seen the need for Asians to actually embrace failure as a means to actually improve? Like, how do you see it?
We in some courses, right, we cannot do this at a very large scale. I mean that if your course is like 600 students, you can't really do this, right? But sometimes we actually have course that's actually smaller, like 50, 60. Yeah, someone in the audience, if they're in NUS computing, they probably know which module we are talking about, right? In those courses, we will repeatedly throw something back to the student. right? That is probably the first time they get rejected over and over again, right? So it's basically a software engineering course, but instead of a fixed topic, the student actually have to do market research, user tests, and so on to come up with a proposal. And we repeatedly throw back to them and say, I don't think this is valuable. I don't think anyone will use this. How can you actually prove this to us, and so on. And that is probably the first time they actually get rejected, right, for some of them, right? And throughout the course, because they are picking up new ideas and have to develop something that's probably innovative, we also tell them something that's quite important, which is known as the constructive failure, meaning that you can fail, but just make sure that next time you fail in new, interesting way, right? If you repeat your failure, it means you never learn anything, right? But if you fail, it's fine. Just make sure you fail in a way that you can learn so that you don't repeat it, right? So that can be done through teaching, but then unfortunately, right, scale is a problem, right? So if you do this to 600 students, because the feedback is very important, right? You need to guide them through this failure process, so that they know you are not just being like a statistic, like just trying to torture them. You have to let them know there's actually a rationale or purpose, right, in these manners. That's unfortunately limited by the scale, right? So we do agree that we need to teach this to students, especially now we do get in the so-called stronger student, right? They may have not failed before at all, right? And school is the safest place for them to fail, right? And we do actually try to fail them from time to time, right? Yeah. So that's again my take on it. Yeah.
I think constructive failure, that's a very beautiful phrase.
I think there's a talk on this somewhere. It could be even Simon Sinek or something like that. Yeah, it could be.
It sounds very
I heard
familiar.
it from
Like,
somewhere. Yeah. I think
maybe deja vu.
it's probably one of his talk. Yeah.
Okay, I have another question next pre-submitted in. So this is going to be a question that's actually I feel like maybe a bit thorny, but more perception towards myself. All right, so and actually out of four of us, okay, Uncle Soo, you're the only parent, so I guess you also are the only one qualified to answer this properly. Though I do have some opinions on this, but I'm interested to hear what everyone thinks.
I don't think tech is the focus, but there's something that is actually quite important, which is probably now quite trendy, right? Maybe already not trendy already. It's called the computational thinking, meaning that you understand how computation works, right? And it actually can be taught without a computer, because it's not about computer, right? It's about how problem can be broken down in a way that if you ask software engineer, we tend to break down problem in a very interesting way that most other discipline doesn't do, right? We break down problem into isolated pieces. We use abstraction to hack the details and say, okay, if this can be done, the output of this can be pumped into the other as an input. We can do further processing and so on, right? This is actually a valuable skill, because in future, the next generation, whether they like it or not, they are going to use computer as a tool, right? Then they have to understand what they can do, right, on computer, right? So whether they're doing development, right, is not the point, right? If they are actually doing accountancy, law, or whatever degree, they have to know what this tool can do for them, right? A very simple example would be you can imagine that all of them may need to use Excel from time to time, right? If you actually understand computation, you can do magic in Excel, right? So that's what I mean, right? So computation thinking may be something that will become important core, right? Like the basic mathematics, right? At least that's my view, right? And actually, university is actually doing this. They are teaching computational thinking to all freshmen. Now it's actually a sort of a core module, right, in NUS. Yeah.
So maybe I'll follow up this. I think from my angle. So this question was also asked. I mean, pre-submitted in, also asked in maybe one of my groups a few weeks ago, and I also like to put my answer forward that very similar to Uncle Soo's answer, in the sense that maybe for even kids at that age, probably the more important thing is to look more towards problem-solving skills than teaching them how to look at problems and solving them. I mean, things like learning about Python, C, or that, those are essentially things that can be picked up later on, as long as you have the core skill sets. It's only about using, it's like you have a hammer, you you have like 2 different types of hammers. Later you can figure out how to use which hammer to nail the nail in, but it doesn't matter which hammer you use, which brand of hammer or whatever. But if you know the knowledge on how to do certain things, you know how to solve certain problems, I think that definitely will land into different capabilities or disciplines that you can pursue in your life later on. Yeah. Curious about what Julius and Jiaxing thinks.
Arrow.
Maybe I can.
I think it was in our group chat, like we discussed about this.
Really?
Yes. Yeah.
But yeah, it's a very interesting question because I'm guessing maybe also from an very Asian culture. I'm not sure about you guys. Like your parents might have sent you to learn how to swim, learn how to play piano. There's always that emphasis on and tuition. I mean, tuition that's the most common one as well, but there's always the emphasis on learning skill plus one. Yeah.
Yeah, actually, my pastor shared this recently that I thought was really interesting. He was saying that when we're younger, all our parents will encourage us to go for swimming, piano lessons, dance classes, and then when we get to like primary school and secondary school, it's like you better study. Don't go and spend time playing sports. Don't spend time playing music, and then like you end up sort of like wasting whatever you learned when you were younger. So I sort of feel that it's like the purpose, right, of why we want to do it. I mean, why we want to go for certain lessons when we are young, why our parents want to send us for certain lessons when we are younger. And also, in an ideal world, I would think that, the kid from a young age identify what they like and then can focus on it throughout, their education years instead of just giving it all up and focusing on grades.
Yeah, so since I'm the only qualified person here,
Parents, yes.
I have 2 kids. My view is quite simple in the sense that when you get the kids to learn something, you have to, as the parent, you should ask yourself, what is your objective, right? So, for example, learning a piano or whatever, if you say, oh, I hope that he or she will have something else to write on the resume, right, when they actually apply for secondary school, that is a totally wrong objective, right? Learning piano is actually a way to appreciate music, and then in future when you feel down or whatever, music can actually help you, right? And you actually can get through difficult period. At least that's my take on it, right? And then if that's the case, then you probably will not discourage your student, your kids to stop playing music, because this should be part of their way of living. They will love it or hate it, right? If they hate it, right, just stop sending them to those classes. That's how I think it. Yeah.
Okay, I have another question. I'm gonna pull it up. So I guess this one maybe from members of public, more asking in towards understanding how education institutions, universities would think about leadership as well, as part of a curriculum. I'm probably gonna throw in things like NOC. I'm guessing that's under NUS. NOC.
So this is one of those big question that to be honest with you, I don't think it has ever changed, right? In a good education system or in a good discipline or whatever, where we teach the kids, we never teach them just because of the vocational use of it. So we always tell the student, okay, you always complain we don't teach you the latest cutting edge technology. It's not because we don't know them, right? It's because we believe there are key principles that you can learn, like what Wei Yan say, right? Once you know how to use a hammer to construct stuff, in future you can just pick up any kind of hammer, right? Whether it's an electric hammer or whatever, right? So from that viewpoint, we are not in a sense doing new things, right? But rather we again expose the student, right, to see the opportunity that the discipline actually give to them. I like to tell my student that in a sense we are given superpower, right? If you actually can do software, you are given a special superpower, right? Because just imagine how easy is it, right, for a single person sitting in a room, a garage somewhere, type on the computer, then suddenly you have an app that can actually affect potential millions of people,
Mm.
right? That is really a superpower, right? And you should learn that you also have responsibility, right? That whatever you develop should also at least don't do no harm, right? That sounds like Google's motto long time ago, right? So that is also important, right? So we do teach this to the student, but then the problem is sometimes when you teach this is you lack of a context, right? Because they don't see them doing this until later on, right? So most students will think, oh, this is just things that the teacher have to say, but they will just go in and then forget about it, right? But hopefully these are actual lesson that hopefully in future will come up from their subconscious and help them to actually make a good decision, right? So yeah, that's my very nonsensical answer to this, I guess. Yeah.
I think I got a bit of Spider-Man vibes when you mentioned responsibility and power.
Yes, that is probably talking about us. Yeah.
But we do also explain to the audience. Just now I throw in NOC in regards to NUS. So just to explain, that's NUS Overseas College. I guess for COVID period now, probably it's a bit hard to get in.
Yes, it's
Not referring to the
suspended,
other.
actually.
Not referring to the other NOC that has been what's that, like on the news for probably the past few months.
There's a company, right? Is it?
Yeah, there's a
NOC.
media company.
Okay.
Yeah. Okay, so we are running short on time. I want to touch on maybe our last question. So also to give Uncle Soo a chance to maybe reach out to the audience in terms of in terms of outlook towards the industry. So will there be any advice you want to give current students in this different computing courses, in Singapore, as well as also for adults who might be looking at transitioning in?
Okay, my advice is actually for anyone who may have an interest is that you need to find some way to actually expose yourself to what computing is actually about, right? We do have students saying, oh, I like computer game, I go into computing. It actually happens, right? Then they turn, oh, this is nothing that I imagined with, right? I actually don't see any games until maybe second or third year, right, kind of thing, right? So that's very important. You need to expose yourself to what computing is really about, right? So something that we mentioned before is mostly training of a way of thinking, like computational thinking. That once you actually understand how we solve problem, then the solution can be implemented on the computer program, right? That is in the sense the last step of the product, but it's the front part that most of us, right, in computing that enjoys. So if you like this kind of aspect, then computing maybe is a right match for you, right? You also have to be realistic that if you find that this is not something you like, right, you don't love, right, to solve a new problem, hair tearing problem every day, it is okay not to go into computing, right? Not just because it's hot, then you must go into it, right? So it's important to, like, it's just a general advice that it's important to realize what you actually want, right, rather than jumping into anything just because it's hot, right? So, yeah, that's my advice. Yeah.
Yeah, I think that's great advice. Thanks, Uncle Soo, for joining us today. I think it has been a lot of great questions, many great answers as well. Definitely for those who are watching, or maybe if are joining in late, do watch the entire event over here. This will be in YouTube and Facebook later on. So yeah, thanks again, Uncle Soo, for joining us today.
Yeah, my pleasure.
Okay. So okay. So we'll do our final what do you call it, like remaining stuff announcements before we end today's event. Okay, so let me. Okay. Oops. So yep. So actually okay, the sometimes slides don't work too well, but yeah, we do have an upcoming event later on. In fact, not this month, but this is probably during sometime in February. So do subscribe to our social media channel. Definitely, this is a very interesting topic we want to talk about, especially in the COVID period, where I think we have here a lot of colleagues, co-workers, friends who talk about burnout. So this is definitely something we want to touch on and discuss about, how each of us deal with it differently. Yep, so going towards the so this is our end of our event. Hope you guys have enjoyed our discussion today in regards to education. So make sure you remember to like, share, subscribe. You can see our big O the links over there, as well as for developer space. So yeah, till next time. See you guys. Adios. Bye.